Hey, what's up guys? I'm here with my buddy Rodney here, and this is 2014 Civic Si. He's been nice enough to actually let me take it for a spin up in the canyons today. And we actually found this route by accident. As you can see, there's an epic view at the top here. So we're actually going to just take it for a downhill run, and I'll give you my thoughts on the car. Do you want to say a few things about the car?
Yeah, so I bought it last year. It's got around 7,000 miles on it now. Came with the base package, most basic mods, mostly aesthetic. I have a Canaan 69 cold air intake, but everything else completely stock.
So I see you painted the brake calipers red.
Yeah, I just did that last weekend.
It's plus 5 horsepower right there. And otherwise it's on stock suspension, right?
Yeah,
and stock Continental all season. So it's pretty much bone stock except for the intake and a couple of aesthetics, and he's got actually a skunk tooth shift knob, which is quite heavy, feels pretty good, but otherwise it's completely bone stock. So let's just go ahead and take it for a drive. Yeah, so first thing I'm noticing is the shifter is very easy to use. It's typical Honda. If you're used to driving any of the older Civics or Accords or any of the normal front-wheel drive Hondas, this feels just as easy to use, if not easier. It's light. The shifts are relatively short. It's not like an S2000, but I think for a daily driver it's a lot better because it's hard to miss shifts. And I think the steering is the one place where I think the older Hondas did it better, because this I think is an electric assisted steering rack, and so the weight is pretty light, which is not a bad thing, but there's not much feel for the wheel. Like, you can't really feel what the front axle is doing when you take it into a corner. But otherwise it is precise, and the ratio is much quicker than my 99 Civic Si that I used to own, so that's always a good thing. On the stock suspension, there is actually a bit of body roll, and that's to be expected. I mean, after all, it's an SI, it's not a Type R. So it is meant to be more of a daily driver, which is fine. It actually soaks up the bumps really well though, so that's good. I think with some coilovers, stiffer springs, and maybe a sway bar, it would definitely tighten up the suspension in the corners, but as a stock car, it's fine. It's not, you know, like a race car or anything, or a real sports car, but as a kind of a mix between a fun, sporty car and a practical daily driver that can, you know, have a full back seat and a full trunk, I think it does pretty well. I think the main thing that differentiates this generation of Civic Si from the old ones is its engine. Honda has really taken some compromises with this new generation. They've gotten rid of the super high revving, peaky, you know, 8,000 plus RPM redline engines that they used to be known for. Like, for example, the 99 EM1 chassis Si that I used to own, it really had like no torque below the VTEC engagement point, which was 5,600 RPM, and then from that point on it's like a completely different engine. It feels like a race car, but below 5,600 it really just feels like just a basic Civic with a, you know, just a single overhead cam engine. Try not to run over these squirrels here. But Honda has done that to actually improve the low-end torque of the car to make it feel a little bit quicker when you're just driving it around town. And I think they've achieved that to a certain extent. And it still likes to rev all the way to redline, which I think is 7,100 on this engine. But I think a lot of the Honda enthusiasts will agree that it's kind of lost some of the character of the old VTEC engines. And I'll demonstrate in a minute when I rev it out to redline. It doesn't have that kick in the butt VTEC feel and sound that the older engines were known for, like the B16 and the B18, the K20. With the new Civic SIs coming out, they're actually rumored to be going towards all turbocharged engines, and so that's going to be a completely different ballgame. So I think this car was kind of a stopgap solution between the old engines and the new turbocharged ones, in a sense. So let me just do a quick first to second to third gear pull to show you what I mean about the engine. So this one does have a Canaan intake, so the sound, the induction noise is quite a bit louder than stock, but I think you'll see that it just doesn't sound the same revving out to 7,000 instead of 8,000. It's still a good sounding engine. It still loves to rev all the way to 7,100, and it still sounds pretty good, especially with the intake, but again, everything is just a little watered down compared to the older Civics. And on top of that, I think this car, I think it might actually be a bit lighter than the previous generation, but it's still right around 3,000 pounds for the sedan, which in my opinion, for a 205 horsepower car, it could be a bit lighter. Since this is the 2014 model, they actually they revised the exhaust system, so now it's producing 205 horsepower and I believe a little under 180 foot-pounds of torque, whereas the 12 and 13 model had, I think, 201 horsepower and about 170 foot-pounds of torque. Not a big difference, and I doubt you'd be able to tell the difference driving them back to back. The clutch on this car is super light, kind of typical Honda, just like the shifter. And I actually taught Ronnie to drive stick on this car, and I think he would agree that it was really easy to learn stick on this car, right? It's not like, even the S2000, the clutch is a little bit stiffer. The shifter, it's easier to miss shifts because the throws are so short. This one, it's really almost impossible to miss a shift. And the clutch is very forgiving as well. Brakes on this car are actually pretty good. The pedal is pretty solid. It's not the most solid, stock brakes that I've used, but for a 3,000 pound car, I think it works perfectly fine. I haven't driven this car on the track, so I can't comment on brake fade or anything, but for even, spirited driving in the canyons, I think they work just fine. The pedal layout's really good. It's really easy to heel toe. The seating position in this car actually is quite high. After all, it is a sedan, and it's on stock suspension. But I will say that this kind of high dashboard out here makes the car feel like you're sitting pretty low in it, and it's kind of almost like an optical illusion, but it's a nice effect. And the seats are actually very comfortable for someone my size, like 5'7", 150 pounds. I fit perfectly well in the seats. I could definitely see if you're like over 6 foot, over 200 pounds, I think the seat might be a little cramped. If you're looking for something to take to the track or the autocross, or if you're looking for something, rear-wheel drive, super lightweight and communicative, this is not the car for you. But if you can only have a single car and you want a car that's fun to drive in the canyons, but still very easy to live with on a daily basis and can, carry 5 adults and, their luggage for low 20s, I think this is pretty much the best choice. Other cars in this segment would be, I think, the Volkswagen GTI, the Ford Focus ST, the previous generation Mazda Speed 3, Those are all pretty good competitors, but I know the GTI and the Focus ST are both above this car in price by a few $1,000s. But I think you do get what you pay for in terms of performance with those cars. But if you want the typical Honda reliability and ergonomics, and you want a naturally aspirated engine, then this is pretty much one of the only choices you have out there for low 20s. The only other car I can think of that is very close to this car in price would be the Fiesta ST, which I think that car is definitely more fun to drive than this. It has more torque, it's a lot lighter, but of course you're giving up quite a bit of interior comfort with that car, and I've test driven that car before, and the interior quality is definitely not as good as this car. I think Honda definitely stepped it up one notch with the interior of this car compared to the previous one. So this video is actually my first attempt at doing a series of YouTube videos where I'm focusing on the actual driving of the cars. I know there's a lot of other YouTube channels out there that do more comprehensive reviews on the cars, and where they talk about the interior, they talk about the ergonomics, the material quality, all that stuff. But I'm really trying to focus and differentiate my videos based on how cars drive. And so as you'll see in the next few months, I'm going to be coming out with a number of videos of me actually driving cars in the canyons pretty quickly. So I think I'll be able to give a pretty good idea of how the cars handle, how their engines perform, you know, the transmission feel, all the things that you might not typically get with some of the other car reviews. So if you liked what you saw today, then go ahead and subscribe to my channel, and look forward to a bunch of coming videos from me. Thanks.